All right, and we are good. Hey hackers, Blue Cosmo from CCS here. Today I'm going to be doing a lecture off of basically how the rise of cybercrime within Russia. Now, right now there is Russia is invading Ukraine with this whole, I guess, like this invasion. Basically, Ukraine is trying to join NATO, and Russia saw that as a threat. So they invaded. That's like a very nutshell version of what's going on. But that's not what this is exactly about. It's very kind of key and part of it. What this lecture is basically going to be talking about is kind of like how Russia got to this point in order to invade kind of Ukraine. You'll kind of see it. It's very prominent. It's kind of something really interesting within cybersecurity history. So without further ado, here it is. So yeah, Soviet hackers, created by me, of course. So yeah, we will basically be exploring historical conflicts within Russia, right? Basically the rule of Joseph Stalin. You may have heard of him before. If you haven't, I will kind of talk about him later on. But yeah, Joseph Stalin basically led to the rise of cybercrime within Russia. It's a pretty cool concept. And if you haven't heard about this, I guess you'll be learning something a little bit newer today. If you want to take notes or anything, names of power would be kind of interesting. They're pretty prominent within this whole kind of topic and lesson of, Soviet history or Soviet cybercrime history, or I guess Russia's history in cybercrime. I guess is the best way I can explain it. But again, this is based off of my senior thesis, which I did publish to the website, right? If I go on to cosmodiumcs.com, definitely check it out. Link is always in the description. But yeah, there's an article in our articles tab, and this is basically my senior thesis. I just published it to the website, reformatted it a little bit. But if you wanted to get a little bit more in-depth kind of topics and like information off of what I'll be talking to you guys today, definitely check that out. It will be linked here. So yeah. Anyways, a little bit on who I am before we jump into this, in case you have not heard of me. My name is Chris Taylor, also known as Blue Cosmo. It's kind of the stage name. I am the Chief Executive Officer here at Cosmodium Cybersecurity. Cosmodium CS is basically a cybersecurity education company where we kind of serve to teach people about topics like this, cybersecurity history, cybersecurity education, how to hack, that whole thing. So if you definitely want to get into that space, I would definitely suggest checking us out. I have our website here in the socials. I'm also a security educator, a malware developer, and as most notably a YouTuber. You probably are watching this on my YouTube channel, or you're taking this as a course on the website. Either or, hopefully it's something you find really interesting. Again, definitely check out the site. We have pretty cool courses along with this one. So yeah, definitely check that out. Links are right here. But yeah, so some requirements for the course. Literally nothing. Just to take it all with a grain of salt, as I mentioned before, I believe. Foreign affairs can be a pretty controversial subject. So understand this is like, these are talking about historical events in the past. They may not reflect the current status or affiliation with Russia. So just kind of understand this is just history. These are just information off of our past, and not to take it so wholeheartedly. Basically, Russia, don't hack me. No, so yeah, so let's talk about early Russia, right? Early Russia, we can kind of go into the war background. So the United States has had many conflicts with, foreign powers over the years, at least war conflicts, right? Kind of Britain within the Revolutionary War, we had a very kind of naval kind of warfare. So that's one foreign power that we had a kind of war conflict with, right? Revolutionary War. We also had Germany, right? Germany in World War One and Two. I guess they were definitely more prominent within World War II, but they were still very present within both. And there's a lot of aerial warfare, right? A lot of planes, and with naval warfare, there's a lot of like overseas boats and such. Then we have the Middle East, in the War on Terror. This mainly worked through tactics of terrorism, hence the War on Terror. And then another prominent one, which is the one we're going to be focusing on the most throughout this presentation, is Russia, and Russia during the Cold War. Now, the Cold War was very non-violent war. It's a very interesting war because it mainly worked through things of power moves and such, and a lot of espionage. If you don't know what espionage is, it's basically spying, right? Kind of gathering intelligence or information off of our enemies, off of our targets. That's basically what the Cold War was in a nutshell, right? It was just Russia and the U.S. spying on each other. It's a lot more advanced than that, and we'll kind of talk about those things as well. But hopefully that's just kind of a basic understanding, right, to get us started. So Joseph Stalin, you may have heard of Joseph Stalin before. Joseph Stalin, who's the big dude with the mustache, right? He was basically the general secretary of, the Soviet Union, which is now modern day Russia. Don't get it mixed up. He was a communist, right? If you don't know what communism is, it's basically kind of like a financial gain system, right? And basically all financial gains from different products and services were more evenly split with the people who created them. Now, in concept, this sounds really appealing, but it is not very effective in practice. I promise you, it is not very effective. Most countries and areas that practice types of communism will usually fall into famine or poverty. And spoiler alert, that's basically what's going to happen to Russia, right? They basically follow this practice and it doesn't work out too well. But Stalin did build, the Soviet Union into the military-industrial complex that it is today. So you'll see definitely like within Russia how it's a very like military-industrial complex. That is all due to Joseph Stalin. So Russia's role within World War II, right? We're going to start with World War II, make our way into the Cold War, and then to current events, right? So Russia's role in World War II, right? So kind of started out, this is kind of like a super quick showdown on what happened in World War II, right? So 1939 is kind of when Stalin initiated this Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. What this is basically a pact of non-aggression between the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany. So during World War II, I'm sure you guys have some familiarity of, World War II, the Holocaust, Nazi Germany, and the Soviet Union, right? Basically, they were allies, so we can trade, we can do this, that, and the other, and not have to worry about it. Basically, a week after that treaty was signed, Nazi Germany invaded Poland. This kind of incited the entire war, right? The United Kingdom and France declared war on Nazi Germany, like a week after this treaty was signed. After that, I think 1941, Nazi Germany did invade the Soviet Union. So this basically broke the treaty that they had here. So Germany was not, or at least Nazi Germany was not, here to keep those pacts. They were here to, have that level of power they wanted to have. Again, power will be a very prominent theme without this entire thing. So then 1945 rolls around, right? And the Soviet Union basically invades Berlin. And that's how they, quote unquote, win World War II, right? Basically, the Soviet Union did a huge role within World War II, right? They did invade Berlin. Hitler did, I believe, he committed suicide, right? In 1945. And that's kind of like how the World War II came to an end, right? Again, this is a super quick showdown. This is not, everything that happened. There's a lot of information in World War II, but these are just the keynotes to kind of get you to understand what's going on, right? Basically, this Soviet Union win that they had by this invasion of Berlin kind of put Joseph as the dictator of the Soviet Union. So he kind of got, that step up in charge as, a more, I guess, executive role within Russia. So let's kind of talk about Polytechnical Schools. All right, so basically the education system, Polytechnical Schools are an education system. Basically, they focused on teaching technology and engineering skills. However, we're talking about Soviet Russia Polytechnical Schools. Again, this may not reflect current Russia and their schooling system and such. This is all past. This is all history, cybersecurity history, right? So basically, these schools, though, they actually rid of moralistic classes, right? So they kind of got rid of things like general ethics and how to be a good person. And it's not like you get that in school, but there is a community oriented around being a better person and such. You can kind of see this, and I'll kind of re-clarify parts of this and such, but classes that, taught young students how to act, the difference between right and wrong, and ethics were all removed. So we're getting these polytechnical schools that were focusing on teaching technology and engineering. They got rid of these moralistic classes. Basically, there's an interview actually with Andrei Solodov. I believe I'm saying that name correctly. He is the writer of The Red Web. It's a really good book. You definitely should check it out. Kind of talks about this concept that I'm kind of introducing to you guys here as well. But he said in an interview that the students there were kind of taught concepts like an engineer should only provide technical expertise, an engineer should never question authority. So at a young age, students within Soviet Russia, or I guess kids, right, because you're in school, right, were being taught these concepts at a very young age, and all of these curriculums were engineering focused. So what ends up happening, so the result of Polytechnical Schools, right? So basically we get generations of students who grow up to be engineers with very little ethics, right? This kind of forces the Soviet Union to become the largest community of engineers in the world. So at the time, Soviet Russia had the largest community of engineers in the world. You can kind of take that in for a second. This is around, late world or post World War II. That's pretty interesting, right? That's kind of like a huge standing of power within the world. But generations of these students, again, like they have no ethics, right? So what kind of ends up happening here is, well, first of all, they focus on nuclear warfare. There's kind of these weird stages within World War, or at least the Cold War. There's kind of like the nuclear phase, then there's like the space race, and then there's like the espionage that's kind of intertwined between it all. But yeah, basically they focus on nuclear warfare, right? And they're trying to create an atom bomb. Before I move on, I'll take a break here, just kind of hopefully get you guys to understand all that stuff. Awesome, cool. So the next section will be about Russian conflicts. All right, Russian conflicts. Basically, the Soviet Union wished to keep their existing title of power, because they are already the greatest, or at least at the time have the most powerful community of engineers in that current world, right? Again, that theme of power that I was talking about earlier is still prominent here. Basically, they had stationed Red Army troops in Iran and these other European states. The Red Army is basically their military at the time, just to kind of clarify. So basically, due to these escalating tensions, first of all, the United States puts Air Force bases in global areas to kind of prevent or to have, some sort of power against Russia, because, Russia is at this time, very powerful. So the United States is preparing for anything that might happen and probably will happen. Then we have Western powers that created NATO. So you may have heard of NATO before. It's kind of the whole backing behind why Russia is actually currently invading Ukraine. Russia is currently invading Ukraine because, Ukraine tried to join NATO or is considering joining NATO, something like that. And what's basically happening is if Russia, or if NATO, or if the Ukraine were to join NATO, it would be a huge threat to Russia, which is why they ended up invading them, right? Currently, right now, we don't know the final standing right now. Russia is still invading Ukraine. Please pray for them and all that. But anyways, yeah. So Western powers basically created the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, right? This was kind of a way for these Western powers, these allies after World War II, to kind of unite and have a structural standing to prevent against threats like, Soviet Russia at this time. So then we have, the Soviets did not become a part of NATO. They actually, wanted to keep their hold of power, right? As I kept saying, power is this huge power, or a lot of power within this presentation. But so the Soviets did not join NATO. They wanted to be able to keep their Red Army troops here. They wanted to keep their community of engineers. Soviet Russia was powerful, like really powerful. The Soviet Union was not the strongest due to the communist backing behind it, and they did fall. I believe 1991 is when they fell. But regardless of that structure, at the time they were very powerful, right? So kind of as these conflicts grew, again, especially amongst allies and Soviet Russia, this is kind of how the Cold War actually began, right? All of these conflicts, all these tensions, Russia or Soviet Russia not trying to join NATO, all this is kind of inciting for the Cold War to actually begin. So let's actually talk about the Cold War, right? The Cold War actually had nothing to do with cold weather. For the longest time, I always thought, it's like a giant snowstorm or something. Totally wrong. It actually has everything to do with power and politics. All right, power, again, super huge theme again. Basically, power and politics, the entire war was just power moves and political moves. It was the entire war. It was just power moves and political moves. It's interesting how we call it a war because it's like a war on power, war on politics, right? So basically, it kind of incited with espionage between these allied powers, United States and Russia. Now, there were other powers intertwined between the Cold War. However, these were the main culprits, the United States and Soviet Russia, right? That was the Cold War. right? It was between them. So first came the nuclear arms race. This was like that battlefield. Remember earlier how I talked about the Revolutionary War, where Britain had like a more naval front. The War on Terror had like a front through terrorism. Germany between World War I and World War II had a more like aerial front with planes and such. So the nuclear arms race was kind of like this huge jump in, cyber, I guess, within the Cold War. Basically, nuclear bombs. I was saying guys earlier, Russia at the time had the most powerful community of engineers, and they were focusing on making nuclear weapons. So you can only imagine, this is a huge eye raising for NATO and the United States. So that's kind of how espionage grew, because hey, even though Russia wasn't like declaring war or anything, in order to protect ourselves and make sure that we are secure, NATO and the United States needed to conduct espionage on Soviet Russia to ensure their safety. Because that's kind of that's a huge power or a huge presence within the world. And you need to make sure that you need to be safe, right? After that kind of became the race to space. Actually, to kind of clarify before we jump into that, right? Nuclear war, for the most part, does not work. If you've seen the movie War Games, it kind of hints on this topic, right? You send a nuke over, then you have counter defenses, and then next thing you know, the world's like Fallout 4. What we can kind of say is like this kind of type of warfare was a lot of like power moves, right? We're just saying, hey, we have these weapons, we can bomb you. But no bombs were actually like detonated and such. Then there was the race to space. You probably are most familiar with this part of the Cold War, right? We basically saw space as a new battlefront. We also saw, hey, having nuclear, items in space would be awesome. So there was that whole race to space, and then we got a man on the moon, and that kind of was like the victory of the race to space. But as tensions evolved, so did the battlefield, right? So you can see throughout all of history, throughout all of war, the battlefield just involves with these tensions. But you can see we evolved from like the nuclear arms race to the race to space, and eventually we're going to lead to the battlefield of cyber warfare. So let's talk about New Russia, or the New Russia, right? This New Russia is like the 90s, but basically the Soviet Union started to fall with Stalin. Stalin died on March 5th, 1953. So, Joseph Stalin died. The Soviet Union was like, this is kind of when the Soviet Union just started going downhill, right? Basically, Russia kept those Polytechnical schools, right? The schools that Joseph Stalin implemented that turned Russia into that giant community of like engineers. Yeah, they kept those, right? And kept getting those, students, again, with regardless of their immoral backing, right? Polytechnical schools are very immoral. It is completely immoral. Was it a smart move in the political spectrum? Maybe. But regardless, it is completely immoral. But that doesn't matter to the Soviet Russia, right? They kept the Polytechnical schools. And what this ended up doing, right, is as the Soviet Union fell, these engineers that were in these Polytechnical schools and in charge of all these companies, well, first of all, these Polytechnical engineers actually backed the economy behind Russia, but also, actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me slow down, right? So basically, these Polytechnical engineers, right, they basically took charge of these technology companies that backed Russia's economy as the Soviet Union fell. So basically, these, engineers with little ethics or morals, who are super smart with these technological companies who are backing Russia's economy, are kind of in charge, right? And Russia kind of had this huge like technological boom, as states here. But basically, as I kind of hinting at, these unethical engineers were able to create and develop new technologies, right? In exchange for their products and services for the government's favor, right? Because the entire point of this is like Polytechnical schools was to promote Soviet intentions. They're saying, hey, we need to teach people how to become engineers, how to build nuclear bombs, how to build computers, this, that, and the third. And, have it all be in Russia's favor, like praise Russian motives, or Soviet Russian motives. But yeah, so let's talk about the birth of cyber espionage, right? This is kind of where cyber kind of comes into the whole picture. It's kind of cool, right? So Espionage, as I mentioned before, is the process of gathering intelligence off of a target. If you guys are in the ethical hacking world, it's kind of like reconnaissance, right? But it's a lot more intricate, right? You're not just gathering intelligence, but you're building a whole profile and you're sending it. I guess it is like reconnaissance, right? If you guys are in the ethical hacking spectrum, it's basically like reconnaissance, but like you're a red teamer who only does reconnaissance. But yeah, that's basically espionage, right? Basically powers like foreign powers like United States, NATO, Soviet Russia, all of that, they relied on spies to conduct espionage on each other, right? You've seen those spy movies with like, I don't know, Mission Impossible, James Bond, whatever. People who are spying on other powers, right, to gain information. However, this was semi-effective. Like, spies were cool, definitely in movies and stuff, but they were expensive, they were hard to manage. I mean, first of all, it put human lives at risk, right? Sending people over to Russia just to get information on a floppy disk and then fly them back, that's like a lot of work, a lot of money, right? Even traveling to those foreign countries is already just putting spies on the line, or spies' lives on the line. Also being able to successfully gather intel, because I promise you most operations probably were not that successful. Not most, but a lot. And also, the consequences if a spy were to be caught on its own, it's just like, dangerous. So basically, with this boom of technology, the ability to conduct cyber espionage was born, right? Instead of gathering intelligence off of a target by sending spies over, let's just, hack them, right? That's kind of how this kind of period kind of turned from this level of physical spies, kind of turning towards more of a cyber espionage tactic. So yeah, let's talk about cyber warfare, right? So cyber warfare or cyber espionage basically allowed countries to monitor foreign activities throughout the growing use of technology, right? As I was kind of mentioning before, this kind of obvious line right here, right? Basically, the ability to gain unauthorized access into a system, which is called hacking, basically allowed these governments to gather intelligence off each other on a whole new level, right? They could actually, not have to spend all this money sending spies everywhere. They could just, hack them, right? It's super cool, super cool. So as these tensions, started to grow with these foreign powers, these tensions did escalate, as they do always. So do their tactics, right? Eventually, this led to the use of cyber, as a tactic of warfare, as you are seeing currently with the current invasion on Ukraine from Russia. Right now, they are using some sort of hybrid warfare tactic, right? They are not only using a more advanced military front, right? Military. Ooh, okay. Just pretend I understand what I'm talking about. Basically, they're using a hybrid form of war, right? They're not only using their military and bombs and such, but they're also attacking through cyber. And then I believe Anonymous declared war on Russia, and then there was Conti and all this other stuff. But yeah, it's like a joint war on cyber and military, like modern warfare, right? It's pretty cool. Modern warfare and cyber warfare. That's the best way I can explain. But yeah, so this is kind of a vital example, a vital example of this section right here is the story of Edward Snowden. I'm sure you've heard of Edward Snowden. If you haven't heard of Edward Snowden, they actually have a movie on Snowden. It's literally called Snowden. I believe it's on Netflix if you guys want to watch it. It's pretty cool. Kind of like you'll be paranoid for a little bit after watching that movie, I can't lie. But it's pretty interesting. I definitely suggest checking it out. But yeah, let's talk about Edward Snowden. Edward Snowden. He was a security professional for the NSA, I believe. He also worked in army and stuff, and he did a lot of stuff. But he basically learned about the existing privacy invasion that lie within the United States government. Now, real quick, there is so much more Edward Snowden did. But for the sakes of this presentation, to keep information short, I'm very much generalizing a lot of this information to kind of give you guys the understanding of how Soviet Russia grew into such a huge cyber power. So that's kind of to clarify, right? So yeah, privacy invasion within the United States. They were monitoring American citizens with their webcams, their keystrokes, their on-screen activities. Fun fact: if you guys are current viewers of the channel, you will see OnlyRat, which is a remote access toolkit that we are building, and that can actually do all of this stuff. It's really cool. Anyways, but yeah, the government could watch you right through your webcam. They could be watching me as I'm recording this for you guys. Pretty cool. Also kind of concerning, right? That's what Snowden thought. So what he did through an act of treason was he did steal classified information from the United States government. That is an act of treason. It is. But what he did do is he kind of took this information and leaked it publicly, right, through WikiLeaks and some other news networks. Basically, this was all over the news about kind of the existing invasion that kind of took place. Again, there's a lot of other stuff that was involved within the scandal, but just to kind of clarify or kind of generalize it a little bit so that way you guys can understand what's going on. Now, Snowden is considered to be both a hero and a terrorist by the general public, right? He did commit acts of treason, but he also brought light on some power or the capabilities of the United States government. I guess it's really up to you to decide. I'm kind of leaving my opinion out of this just to teach you guys what happens, right? This is kind of for you guys to form your own opinions, learn about it, and grow through it, right? But yeah, so that's kind of Edward Snowden, right? So where does Russia fall into this, right? This is Edward Snowden who, was leaking all this stuff out. Where does Russia fall into this? Well, Russia, first of all, Snowden leaked out even like cybersecurity tactics that the NSA was using to spy on foreign powers. So what did Snowden do? Well, his leak basically allowed Russia to gain further intelligence on the United States and its capabilities, as that information was very beneficial to Russia and their capabilities, right? So what they did is they offered Snowden refuge within Russia. So currently, I believe Snowden, as of current era or current knowledge, he's still over there in Russia chilling. So basically Russia offered Snowden refuge. And this was a huge power move. This is arguably one of the biggest power moves against the United States by Russia. Basically, he's still over there, right? The United States cannot legally go over there to extradite him. Again, like if the United States were to go over there and extradite him, it would cause extensive foreign conflicts. I'm pretty sure it's also illegal. But yeah. So this is arguably one of Russia's most powerful moves within the world of cybercrime, outside of their just hacks and stuff, like being able to offer, like, it's kind of like your own. They took one of their own in, even though one of their own went against them, right? That's kind of like the generalized kind of version of Russia's role in that. And it's kind of interesting to see like how Russia made that move of taking him in for refuge and, giving him like sanction and such for his act of treason against the United States, right? So let's talk about the election hack. You probably heard of this if you're living in the United States. Basically, the Russian government committed a cyber attack on the United States in 2016. This was the year of the election for candidates Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, right? The intention of this attack was to actually boost candidate Donald Trump's campaign and ultimately harm Hillary Clinton's campaign. Now, again, this is a very controversial topic. I do have sources and such, so just wait. But just kind of hear us out and just, take it all with a grain of salt. So they were first successfully able to leak Hillary Clinton's emails. This was a huge scandal. And this kind of not only hugely boosted Trump's campaign, but this also made a huge dent in Hillary's campaign. So that's kind of where one of the key places where Russia actually took, dominance within that election hack. There also was an analysis by NATO on this hack. You can take a second to read this entire thing if you want to. Feel free to pause the video. But basically, they were doing an analysis of Russia's involvement in the election and declared the hacker groups Cozy Bear and Fancy Bear, which also have these cool little code names. Basically, they targeted 21 United States or local electoral boards. And they basically, this kind of just talks about their role within the election hack and also talks about how they were also responsible for government level hacks within the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. So Russia and government or state-sponsored hackers are not only targeting the United States, but they're targeting the United Kingdom, France, and Germany. I believe the United Kingdom and France are part of NATO. I am unaware of Germany's position, But just to kind of emphasize, right? Russia is always having like this huge power of cybercrime, cyber power within this space. It's pretty interesting to kind of analyze and look at. So now we're going to talk about the Colonial Pipeline. Now, the Colonial Pipeline, basically with confirmed or unconfirmed government involvement, this isn't necessarily about the government's involvement. This is about Russian cybercrime. And these Russian hackers committed a huge act of cyber terror on foreign countries. When a major example of this was the Colonial Pipeline attack of 2021. Now, the Colonial Pipeline attack was pretty crazy. Basically, if you aren't aware of what happened, the Colonial Pipeline is a gas line that provides gas to facilities all over the East Coast, from literally Texas all the way to New York. Yeah, that's literally like the entire right side of the far right side of America. Yeah, so all that gas basically was cut off due to a ransomware attack by the group DarkSide. It was a pretty interesting attack, right? They rendered these facilities useless. People were like putting gas in like Ziploc bags and like grocery bags, and like people were fighting. It was pretty crazy. I live on the East Coast, so I got to see firsthand how crazy people can be when they don't have gas. But yeah, no, this was actually like a really big, important attack. It slowed down a lot of things. A lot of things rely on gas, especially like emergency EMS vehicles, right? Emergency medical services. I think that's what EMS stands for. Basically, emergency vehicles who relied on gas. Other people who relied on gas. Gas is super important because it powers all these cars, all these vehicles. And yeah, all those facilities were pretty much rendered useless or couldn't be filled up more. All thanks to a ransomware attack by a hacker group, DarkSide. Now, there's more information about this. I believe Forrest Knight made a video about the actual attack. If you guys want to check that out, I definitely suggest checking it out. It's pretty interesting. But yeah, so again, as I mentioned, DarkSide was the hacker group who took responsibility for this attack. So yeah, that's kind of it. Before I kind of end it off, I'm just going to talk about this whole thing for a second. So first of all, as you are probably familiar by now, as you've heard on the news, currently Russia is invading Ukraine. The entire point of this lecture was to kind of give you guys some background on Russia's past within the cybersecurity space and kind of give you an understanding of the actual power and their history within cyber security. They are arguably one of the most powerful threats within the cyber world. And as you were able to see through my entire presentation here, kind of talking about all the way from Joseph Stalin installing Polytechnical Schools to make an entire global, like most powerful community of engineers in the, at least in that current era in the world, you know, who then when the Soviet Union falls, all of these people are in charge, are basically backing Russia's economy, and then, you know, great engineers with little ethics, backing Russian motives, entering the cyberspace through the Cold War, just incited all this. And it's super cool to look at. And I know, again, you should probably take it with a grain of salt, because it doesn't reflect current events and current, or I guess it does in part reflect current events, but it does, this is all history. This is all history lesson. So hopefully it's something a little bit interesting, a little bit more different. We'll definitely have future lessons on cybersecurity history, as well as the other cybersecurity, you know, things that we're teaching. But hey, hopefully this was something you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave, you know, like on this video if you're watching on YouTube, and if you're watching it on our website, definitely check it out on the website. It's definitely something really interesting and really cool. But that's going to be it for me, guys. So I will see you guys in the next one. So stay happy, stay positive, and as always, happy hacking. Hey hackers, Blue Cosmo from CCS here, and I wanted to introduce you guys to the Happy Hacker Site Plan. The Happy Hacker Site Plan is a plan where you guys can support us for only $1 a month. That's right, $1. With this comes exclusive benefits like courses, articles, videos, and access to our entire cybersecurity knowledge base. If this interests you and you guys want to get access to all this, check out the link in the description. It's only $1, so we definitely appreciate your guys' support. Anyway, enjoy the video, and happy hacking.